So what we are suggesting, or what we're going to be saying, is, to your point, is that in this case, Mr. Champ and Ms. Lee and everybody, they're really putting on the Attorney General's hat in this case. And they're suggesting, hey, the Attorney General didn't bring a lawsuit, which I guess he could have or she could have. They didn't. So they're suggesting, well, we have the right to, and we should. They're basically trying to police and enforce what happened.
They're trying to do a private prosecution, really. If you were to ask me to describe the British justice system, the police, the prosecutions, the courts, the prisons, I would have to answer honestly with the words, it depends. I mean, it depends who you are, not what you did, but who was doing it. I give you the example of my friend Tommy Robinson, who right now is serving 9 months in solitary confinement. He was actually sentenced to the maximum 2 years, but the kind of math, you reduce it by a few months there, a few months here, you're out. Anyhow, he'll be out in a grand total of 9 months, served in solitary confinement, not for any crime. He hasn't actually been convicted of a crime. It's a civil offense he did. He wouldn't take a video down from Twitter. That's an extremely harsh sentence. Other than Julian Assange, I don't know of anyone in the world who has spent 9 months in solitary confinement. I don't think it's healthy. By contrast, thousands of different rape gang members in the United Kingdom, these are men who repeatedly rape young girls again and again in these child exploitation networks, they're typically sentenced to a couple of years in jail and get out much sooner for a much more heinous crime. So I say again, where you stand is based on where you sit over there and who you are. And that's why the British Prime Minister has a nickname. His name is Keir Starmer, but everywhere he's called Two-Tier Keir. And he was even asked about it when he visited the White House. J.D. Vance asked him some questions about the state of freedom of speech, and it depends on who you are. Let me show you a little bit of that exchange. Take a look.
I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies. But we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension, American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time. Well, no, I mean, certainly we wouldn't want to reach across US citizens, and we don't, and that's absolutely right. But in relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
Yeah, I think it used to be true that the United Kingdom had a lot of free speech, but I think J.D. Vance is onto something there. You have free speech if you say the right things, but of course that's not free speech at all. Now let's transpose that to Canada. Do we have two-tier justice in Canada also? I'd like to think we're not as far down that path as the United States, but sometimes I don't know. Let me give you the example of the harassment hate marches that the Hamas protesters have done in Canada over the past year and a half. I'm not just talking about mean words. I'm talking about actual crimes. Uttering threats, trespass, mischief, stalking. I mean, yes, there's hate crimes as well, but I'm not a big fan of those. But how about the other real crimes? Have any of them been prosecuted? I think of how long some of those hate encampments were allowed to fester on university property. So there was the trespass element too. And remember, many of those encampments were staffed by non-students. Compare that. Compare how police forces in Canada have positively acted as concierges for these Hamas hate protests. Well, compare that to how the trucker convoy was treated in Ottawa in 2022. They didn't harass anyone. They didn't trespass. What they did do is they had some parking violations and they honked their horns at least until a judge told them to stop. That's it. In fact, as you may know, crime in Ottawa went down. Nonetheless, they were treated not to the concierge-style police service that we've seen for the Hamas protesters, but Justin Trudeau actually invoked martial law using the Emergencies Act for the first time in history. Like I say, two-tier justice. Well, is that what's happening now in Ottawa? Because a group of Ottawa leftists, led by a bureaucrat named Zexi Lee, have filed a class action lawsuit. Actually, they filed it a few years ago against Tamara Lich and Chris Barber and the truckers for a staggering $290 million. For what? Was this the greatest bank heist in history? No, that's how much they claim they and the rest of their class was harmed by the trucks honking their horns for a few days in Ottawa. Bad news is the federal court, the Court of Appeal of Ontario recently upheld Zexi Lee's right to proceed, denying an application by Chris Barber and Tamara Lich that this was simply a SLAPP suit, a strategic litigation against public participation. The truckers went to court and said, Your Honor, kick this stuff out. It's just a censorship action. And the court said, no, we'll let it proceed. Joining us now to talk about it is one of the lawyers on this project. He's with the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. His name is James Manson. It's good to have you back, James. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Ezra. Thanks for being here.
Well, you know what? You guys are fighting the good fight. We're helping to defend Tamara Lich in the criminal court, but the Justice Center is helping to defend her in the civil court. Tell us a little bit. I think we've talked about this before, but not recently. Maybe recap, what is this lawsuit about? Like, how on earth, like $290 million. I feel like I'm listening to Dr. Evil when he puts his pinky to his mouth and says, billion, a trillion. I mean, why not ask for $1 trillion while you're at it? It's just such a, to me, a laughable answer. What would Zexi Lee, the Ottawa bureaucrat who's one of the faces of this suit, what would she say has been damaged to the extent that she and her friends get $290 million?
Well, Ezra, I'm glad you asked, and I want to sort of maybe resituate this for you. I'm not sure that the viewers are really aware of how this all started. Back in 2022, as the Freedom Convoy protest was going on, that's when Ms. Lee started this lawsuit, in the first place. Originally, this was a much smaller lawsuit. It was only for about $8 or $9 million, I think, which is a lot, but it's obviously only a small fraction of what it is now. Anyway, Ms. Lee was the only plaintiff at that time. It was against a few people, Tamara Lich, Chris Barber, and a few of the other well-known people in Ottawa at the time. And she was only claiming damages for herself and her, some I think her neighbors, the people in her apartment building directly. Wasn't a very big, area that she was claiming was the subject of a nuisance. This is all about nuisance. And again, for the viewers, Ezra, nuisance is all about enjoyment of your property. You're allowed to enjoy your property in Canada in peace. And basically she was saying, look, the horns and the diesel fumes that I'm suggesting were everywhere, she's saying, caused us a nuisance. All right, she's entitled to claim that. We'll see what happens. But it was a very small claim comparatively. That has since ballooned, exploded into a $290 million Frankenstein, if I could use the term, engaging different classes of plaintiffs. So now it's not only Zexi Lee and her next door neighbors. Now it's all the businesses in Ottawa downtown who had to close. Now it's all the employees who worked in a business that couldn't work because the building was closed or the restaurant was closed or whatever. And it's all the people in the downtown core of Ottawa. Not just her building, not just her neighborhood, everybody in a wide swath, kilometers long, who happened to be there at the time. And here's the interesting thing, Ezra, the new version of the claim, I don't know if people are aware, it says literally, all the people in downtown Ottawa are part of the plaintiffs group, except those who supported the Freedom Convoy. So apparently, honking horns and nuisances affect only the people on that side of the political whatever divide and this issue, and not the others. Horns don't apparently affect people who happened to support anti-COVID protests.
I forget the
I
name of
don't
the
know
lead
where that
lawyer.
gets them.
He's a real leftist activist. Do you remember the name of the lead lawyer in this case?
The lead lawyer's name is Paul Champ.
Right. And he's a hardcore left-wing guy. This is a feast for lawyers. Now, I don't think Zexi Lee or her friends have any dough. I guess class actions like this are usually taken on commission, right? The lawyer says, I'll put in, lots of work over the course of years, and if we win, I get a third or a half or whatever. And I guess they have to either just work as volunteers or somehow get some sort of financing. Do we know anything about financing? Is this being propped up with some NGO money or even Government of Canada money?
We don't know. We don't know, Ezra. That might come out later in the piece. I don't know. But I think it's important, just since I said later on in the piece, I think it's important for the viewers to understand, right? Coming back to this decision that we're talking about from the Court of Appeal, this is a temporary decision. This is a preliminary decision. It is not the final merit, right? It is not the Court of Appeal saying, hey, Tamara, hey, Chris, you got to pony up $290 million. That's not where we are. We're at the bottom of the first inning in this case. And this issue with the Court of Appeal that you've flagged for us, Ezra, is really the result or the end result of a preliminary motion that we brought. Again, you were talking earlier on just now, Ezra, about the SLAPP litigation. This is essentially a way that somebody uses to try to shut down somebody else because they don't like what they're saying. I'm going to sue you into the ground, Mr. Defendant, unless you shut up and keep your mouth shut. And if you don't, you're going to pay. Well, that's essentially a SLAPP, strategic litigation against.
And it's so obvious. I mean, I saw Zexi Lee testify at the Public Order Inquiry Commission. She couldn't be more of a political activist. Her lawyer, as you mentioned, Paul Champ, is a radical lefty. It's so evident to me this is just a punishment lawsuit against Tamara Lich and Chris Barber. But you're saying the Court of Appeal said, well, no, it may have some elements of that, but there's something underneath it that deserves its day in court. I think that's what you're saying.
That's right, Ezra. That's what I'm saying. And there's a lot of dimensions to this case, and I don't want to bog everybody down with all the details. But for example, one of the things we were arguing was that this case engages the concept of a public nuisance, okay? I just want to be technical for a little bit here. There's a private nuisance in law and there's a public nuisance. Private nuisance is generally, hey, you can't interfere with me when I'm having a beer in the backyard and I'm trying to barbecue some chicken. You can't, play your stereo too loud that I'm annoyed. That's essentially a private nuisance. I can claim damages from you if the court establishes that you have interfered with my property. Okay, that's one. Then there's the other concept of public nuisance. Different. What does that mean? Well, that means that there's a community-wide issue going on. For example, the chemical factory on top of the hill is, spewing chemicals all over the place and interfering with everybody's rights to enjoy the atmosphere. Or there's a new runway at the airport and the planes are all coming in and making it impossible for people to enjoy their entire community, things like that. The reason I bring it up, Ezra, is because public nuisances, generally speaking, are not something that you can sue for. It's a community-wide thing. And normally what that means is the Attorney General is supposed to be the one acting on behalf of the people who brings that entire claim against the defendant, whoever it is, the runway, the airport, whatever, on behalf of everybody. And the remedy is not damages. The remedy is an injunction, generally speaking. So what we are suggesting, or what we're going to be saying is, to your point, is that in this case, Mr. Champ and Ms. Lee and everybody, they're really putting on the Attorney General's hat in this case. And they're suggesting, hey, the Attorney General didn't bring a lawsuit, which I guess he could have or she could have. They didn't. So they're suggesting, well, we have the right to, and we should. They're basically trying to police and enforce what happened.
They're trying to do a private prosecution, really. And by the way, the government threw the Emergencies Act at them, and the federal court said that was illegal. and unconstitutional. They got their tickets for parking. It's so obviously a political move to me. And again, this is why I started by talking about two-tier justice. Oh, hi, it's Ezra Levant here in Toronto with an important message because we need your help. Independent journalism in Canada is under attack. Government censors, big tech deplatformers, and the dying legacy media are all working together to maintain exclusive control on the information you receive. They don't want you to hear other voices like ours, and they really don't want you to be informed and to think for yourself. That's why the work we do here at Rebel News is so important. Our on-the-ground reporting, independent news shows, and special content you won't find anywhere else. It's all designed to give you trustworthy information and alternative viewpoints so you can decide for yourself. We don't get government money, and we are not owned by some big global conglomerate. We're funded by people just like you, so please support independent journalism and help us continue our work by subscribing and becoming a Rebel News Plus member today, right here on the page. Go to rebelnewsplus.com.